Jimmy Kimmel needs a kick to his hole. Happy birthday.
I thought I saw Jimmy Kimmel at Home Depot. Turns out it was just a sloppy dude with big dimples.
At Jimmy Kimmel, you are a jackass sucker. Keep your mouth shut and do your little TV show or get the out of our country.
Good afternoon. My name's Wendell Hesrick. I'm Public Safety Director of the City of Pittsburgh. These incidents usually occur in other cities. Today, the nightmare has hit home here in the City of Pittsburgh.
The stakes of this tort report became painfully real on Sunday, the 28th of October. It was clear in the moments following this tragic shooting that the gunman was motivated by hate, and that the hate was followed, liked, and subscribed to by a community connected by social media. So the question needs to be asked: should social media companies be liable for the hate speech on their platforms? Social media has grown at an astounding rate over the past decade. For instance, Facebook had roughly 1 million monthly users in 2004. By 2012, that number had grown to over 1 billion. Now, Facebook has 2.27 billion monthly users. Lawmakers have not had a chance to catch up. The most important legal framework guiding how we treat speech on internet platforms is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. Section 230 essentially holds that platforms cannot be held liable for the speech of their users. And that laissez-faire orientation is reinforced by the detailed terms of service to which all of us consent before we sign up.
Of course, many Americans are naturally inclined to favor a hands-off approach to speech. For many, our most sacred rights are enshrined in the First Amendment. Any government action that limits the ability of citizens to speak freely should be viewed with a healthy skepticism. That applies in the real world, but it should be especially true online. Social media platforms have revolutionized the way that we communicate. Nowadays, speech, especially political debate, is possible in a way that few could have ever imagined. And we should be especially wary of limiting anything resembling political speech online. After all, faith in our democracy should entail a faith in a marketplace of ideas, a marketplace in which the ideologies of hate will wither.
But have social media platforms provided the open exchange of diverse ideas envisioned by the First Amendment? It's worth asking how online speech looks in the status quo. Saloma Viljoen studies the effects of online platforms on our speech at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center.
So I think the status quo right now online is that for some people, online speech is incredibly dangerous and risky and expensive. And those people tend to be women and people of color. And for them, speaking online about anything opens them up to threats of rape, threats of death, being doxxed, having right-wing people send them bombs. So we're not really in a world where speech isn't being regulated online. It is being regulated online by right-wing trolls and other hate groups.
We expect that many of you have experienced this directly. For those of you who haven't, here's journalist and author Lindy West.
Very quickly, my experience on Twitter became one of endless, constant harassment. I'll just read them. No need for you to worry about rape, Ugo. That big is bitter that no one wants to rape her. The goal is to make the platform uncomfortable enough that the targets don't want to use it anymore. They want you removed from the national conversation and removed from whatever little shred of power you've managed to achieve.
A free speech norm online, in practice, can silence the speech of the most vulnerable and elevate the speech of the most toxic voices. In the face of that, even those who most strongly value free speech should pause. Perhaps in order to save free speech, we need to regulate it.
But who's going to be making these important decisions? If your answer is the courts, well, history has shown that they can't successfully adjudicate these issues. Speech laws have often been used to suppress the exact groups that they were meant to protect. Take the case of Feiner v. New York, which made its way to the Supreme Court in 1951. Earlier that year, Irving Feiner was arrested after making a speech to a crowd in New York on the topic of racial equality. It is likely that Mr. Feiner, the man arrested, was the man most in need of protection on that day. but the Supreme Court upheld his arrest. So if the courts can't handle these issues, should the social media companies regulate themselves? Many activists have called for this, suggesting that the platforms change their terms of service and crack down on unwanted speech. The effect of such a move would be to grant unprecedented control to people like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey over what speech is allowed in our public discourse. It's safe to say advocates of each side will be uncomfortable with that prospect.
Concerns about implementation of speech regulations are always valid, but we're talking about a very specific context, social media platforms. It's worth taking a step back and asking again, what does the status quo look like?
I think it's more useful to make things happen and then apologize later.
That was Mark Zuckerberg 15 years ago, before his platform grew to the size it is today. So what did Zuckerberg make happen? Saloma again.
With social media platforms designed to amplify high impact, inflammatory, clickable, news bite types of information, you see an amplification of this type of simplified and hate-mongering messaging. You're all law students, so I will use a torts analogy. Have you all read the case of the flaming rat?
For those who aren't law students, the case involves a small room and an employee who was cleaning a machine with gasoline that later dripped onto a nearby rat. When the rat ran by a pilot light, the complex exploded, killing the employee. The employer was held liable because the harm was foreseeable. You may be wondering, what could a flaming rat possibly have to do with Facebook?
Facebook is like the small enclosed room where you just have a piece of machinery soaked in gasoline. They're not the rat. They didn't cause hatred. They didn't cause racial division. They didn't cause genocide. But they created a room that's essentially an enclosed gas-filled chamber that's ripe for explosion.
So, should social media companies be liable for hate speech on their platforms? There are good arguments on each side of this question. But a law last revisited in 1996 does not seem to be up to the task. Scholars have suggested that we look beyond the bounds of speech laws, drawing solutions from antitrust policies or financial regulations. But there's a reason that a classic torts case worked so well as a metaphor. It's clear that there are foreseeable harms here. Assigning some standard of liability to the platforms is a natural response. Tort law may be uniquely equipped to help by incentivizing a response from the company, without requiring a top-down, heavy-handed regulatory approach. We need to have this conversation, because this issue is not going away anytime soon.